I never imagined my life would end up in a place like this. For nearly 30 years, my apartment had been my sanctuary. The walls held memories of late-night conversations with Maria, the smell of her cooking wafting from the kitchen, and the quiet moments of solitude after she passed away. The worn-out recliner by the window was my favorite spot, where I'd spend hours reading or simply watching the world go by. When Leon, my son, told me he was selling the apartment, I didn't think much of it. He had always been good with money, responsible and level-headed. At least that's what I wanted to believe. He assured me it was for the best, that he needed to settle some debts, and that he'd find me a nice place where I'd be taken care of. I wanted to trust him. After all, he was my only son, the only family I had left. "Dad, you know I wouldn't do this if there was any other way," Leon had said one evening as we sat at the kitchen table. His eyes, normally so sharp and focused, darted around the room as if avoiding mine. "I know, son," I replied, trying to sound reassuring. "You've always done right by me. If this is what needs to be done, then so be it." He nodded, but there was something in his expression, something that didn't sit right with me. It was as if he was already saying goodbye, distancing himself from me even before the apartment was sold. I brushed it off at the time, chalking it up to the stress he must have been under, but deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. The day the apartment was sold was the day I lost more than just a home. It was the day I realized I was losing Leon too. We stood together in the empty living room, the echoes of our footsteps bouncing off the bare walls. I looked around, trying to imagine what my life would be like without this place, without the familiar comfort of these four walls. "You'll like the new place, Dad," Leon said, breaking the silence. "It's clean, it's safe, and the staff will take good care of you." I nodded, though my heart wasn't in it. "I'm sure it'll be fine, Leon." He looked at me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, regret, perhaps, or guilt. But then it was gone, replaced by that distant, almost cold expression I had started to recognize all too well. "I'll visit when I can," he added, but his words lacked conviction. "Of course, son," I replied, forcing a smile. "You do what you need to do." With that, he left, promising to check in on me soon. I watched him walk out the door, the sound of his footsteps fading down the hallway. It wasn't until I heard the elevator doors close that I allowed myself to acknowledge the truth. I was alone. The nursing home wasn't what I expected. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't home either. My room was small, with just enough space for a bed, a dresser, and a chair by the window. The walls were painted a bland shade of beige, and the only personal touch was a photograph of Maria and me on our wedding day, which I placed on the nightstand. Days blurred into one another. The routine was predictable. Breakfast in the dining hall, a brief walk around the garden, lunch, maybe a nap, and then dinner. The staff were polite, even friendly at times, but there was a distance between us, an invisible barrier that reminded me I was just another resident, another old man waiting for the inevitable. It was during one of those walks around the garden that I met Robert Turner. He was sitting on a bench, staring at the fountain in the center of the courtyard. He looked up as I approached, his sharp blue eyes taking me in. "Mind if I join you?" I asked, nodding toward the empty space beside him. "Be my guest," he replied, his voice gruff but not unfriendly. I sat down, letting the silence hang between us for a moment before speaking. "I'm Carlos Baker, you hear." "Robert Turner," he said, extending his hand. His grip was firm, a sign that he still had some fight left in him. "How long you been in?" "Just a few weeks," I answered. "My son." Well, he thought this would be the best place for me. Robert snorted, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Best place, huh?" My daughter said the same thing. "Seems we've both been sentenced to this lovely establishment." I looked at him, sensing a kindred spirit. "She didn't give you much of a choice, did she?" "No," Robert replied, his voice heavy with resignation. "Once my wife passed, it didn't take long for her to decide I was a burden. Said it was for my own good, but we both know the truth." I nodded, understanding all too well. They think they're doing what's best, but they don't realize what it feels like to be left behind. "That's because they're too busy living their own lives," Robert said, a note of bitterness creeping into his tone. "We're just reminders of the past they'd rather forget." We sat in silence for a while, watching the water trickle from the fountain. There was a sense of comfort in Robert's presence, a shared understanding that didn't need words. "You play chess?" Robert asked suddenly, breaking the quiet. I haven't in years, but I used to be decent, I replied. Good enough, he said with a nod. Meet me in the common room after dinner. I've got a board stashed away. That was the beginning of our unlikely friendship. Robert and I became each other's lifeline in that place, finding solace in the small routines we created together. We'd play chess in the evenings, share stories of our pasts, and sometimes just sit in companionable silence. One evening, after a particularly tense game where Robert had beaten me soundly, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. Carlos, we don't have to stay here, you know. There's more to life than this place. I looked at him, surprised. And where do you propose we go? We're old men, Robert. Who's going to take us in? He smiled, a glint of mischief in his eyes. I don't know yet, but I have a feeling something's going to change. We just have to be ready when it does. I wanted to believe him, but the reality of our situation weighed heavily on my mind. I hope you're right, I said quietly. He reached across the table, placing a hand on my arm. Just don't give up, Carlos. Not yet. I nodded, trying to hold on to the sliver of hope he offered. The days ahead were uncertain, but with Robert by my side, I felt a little less alone. Life in the nursing home settled into a monotonous rhythm, the days bleeding into one another in a dull, endless cycle. The sun would rise, and the nurses would bustle in to wake us, their voices bright with forced cheer. We'd shuffle to the dining hall for breakfast, lukewarm oatmeal and weak coffee, before dispersing to various corners of the building, where we'd spend the day waiting. Waiting for lunch, waiting for visitors who never came, waiting for time to pass. But with Robert around, the days weren't as unbearable as they could have been. We found a routine of our own, one that provided a small sense of purpose. Every morning, we'd take a walk around the garden, a patch of greenery tucked away behind the building, where we could pretend, for a moment, that we were somewhere else. The garden was nothing special, a few benches, a small fountain, and a path lined with scraggly bushes, but it was a sanctuary, a place where we could escape the confines of the nursing home, even if only for a short while. One particularly grey afternoon, the rain drizzled lightly against the windows, turning the world outside into a blur of muted colours. I was sitting in my usual spot by the window, staring out at the dismal day, when a nurse, Claire, approached me with a kind smile. Mr. Baker, she said softly, her voice gentle, you have a visitor. I blinked in surprise, turning to look at her. A visitor? Are you sure? She nodded. She's waiting for you in a lounge. A visitor? The idea seemed almost foreign to me. Since arriving at the nursing home, no one had come to see me. Leon had promised to visit, but weeks had turned into months, and I'd long since stopped expecting him to walk through the door. I stood up, my joints protesting the sudden movement, and followed Claire down the hall, my mind racing with possibilities. Who could it be? When we reached the visitors' lounge, Claire gestured for me to enter. I stepped inside, my heart pounding with anticipation, and then I saw her, Gianna. Carlos, she said with a warm smile, standing up to greet me. It's been too long. Gianna, I replied, still trying to process her sudden appearance. What brings you here? She looked much the same as I remembered, with her dark hair pulled back into a neat ponytail and a graceful presence that seemed to fill the room. I hadn't seen her in years, not since she and my brother had divorced. Despite the time that had passed, there was a familiarity in her eyes, a kindness that immediately put me at ease. I heard about what happened, she said, her voice tinged with concern. About the apartment and Leon. I felt a pain of discomfort at the mention of my son's name, but I forced a smile. It's all in the past now. I'm managing. Gianna's expression softened, and she reached out to take my hand, her touch warm and reassuring. I'm so sorry, Carlos. I know how much that apartment meant to you. It's just a place, I said, though the words felt hollow. It was bound to happen sooner or later. She shook her head gently. You don't have to pretend with me. I know how hard this must be for you. I looked at her, suddenly feeling the weight of everything I'd been holding in. The loneliness, the sense of abandonment, the loss of the life I once had. It all came rushing to the surface. But before I could say anything, Gianna spoke again. Carlos, she said, her tone more serious now, I didn't just come here to see how you were doing. I came because I want to help. I frowned, unsure of what she meant. Help? How? Gianna hesitated for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts, then she took a deep breath. I have an apartment. It was my parents', but after they passed, it's been sitting empty. I want you to come live there, Carlos. You and your friend Robert. You don't belong in a place like this. I stared at her, stunned by the offer. You're serious? Of course I am, she replied, her eyes sincere. You were always kind to me, even after the divorce. I hate to think of you stuck in a place like this, without family, without your freedom. You deserve better. Her words hit me like a wave, washing away the numbness I'd been feeling for so long. The thought of leaving the nursing home, of having a place of my own again, seemed almost too good to be true. I hesitated, my mind racing with doubts. Gianna, I don't know, it's a generous offer, but I don't want to be a burden. And Robert? Robert's welcome too, she interrupted, a determined look in her eyes. The apartment has plenty of space, and I could use the company. You'd have your own rooms, your own lives. No one to tell you what to do. I looked at her, still trying to wrap my head around the idea. But why? Why would you do this for us? Gianna smiled, a touch of sadness in her eyes. Because I know what it's like to feel alone. After the divorce, I struggled. But I had family to help me through it. You and Robert, you shouldn't have to go through this alone either. I felt a lump form in my throat, emotion welling up inside me. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear those words, how much I longed for someone to reach out, to offer a lifeline. I looked at Gianna, and for the first time in a long while, I felt hope. I'll talk to Robert, I said finally, my voice thick with emotion. But thank you, Gianna. Truly. She squeezed my hand, her smile warm and genuine. You don't have to thank me, Carlos. Just let me help. As we sat there, talking about the apartment and what the future might hold, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, a sense of possibility. The nursing home had been a place of endings, of slowly fading away, but this was a chance for a new beginning. When I finally left the lounge and made my way back to my room, my steps felt lighter. I couldn't wait to tell Robert, to see the look on his face when I shared the news. We didn't have to stay here. We didn't have to accept this as the end. I found Robert in the common room, hunched over a chessboard, deep in thought. He looked up as I approached, his expression curious. Carlos, where have you been? You missed our afternoon walk. I sat down across from him, unable to hide the smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. You'll never believe who just visited me. Robert raised an eyebrow. The Queen of England. Close, I chuckled. Gianna. My ex-sister-in-law. Robert looked surprised. Gianna? What was she doing here? She offered us a place to live, I said, my excitement bubbling over. Her parents' old apartment. She wants us to move in with her. Robert stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. You're serious? As a heart attack, I replied, grinning. We could get out of here, Robert. Have a place of our own again. For a moment, Robert was silent, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, one of genuine happiness and relief. Carlos, this is incredible. I can't believe it. Neither can I admitted. But it's real. We just have to say yes. Robert leaned back in his chair, shaking his head in disbelief. I never thought I'd see the day. Carlos, this is our chance to live again. Then let's take it, I said, feeling a surge of determination. Let's get out of this place and start fresh. Robert nodded, a look of resolve in his eyes. Let's do it. And with that, our fate was sealed. The nursing home, with its grey walls and endless waiting, would soon be behind us. We had been given a second chance, and we weren't about to let it slip away. The day Robert and I left the nursing home felt surreal, like waking up from a long, hazy dream. There was a sense of finality as we packed up our few belongings, mostly clothes, some books, and a few personal items that held more sentimental value than practical use. As I folded the last of my shirts into a worn suitcase, I paused to look around the small, beige room that had been my home for the past several months. It was strange to think I'd be leaving this place behind, and even stranger to realize how little I would miss it. Robert appeared in the doorway, his suitcase already in hand. Ready, Carlos? I nodded, closing the suitcase with a finality that echoed my resolve. Ready. Claire, the nurse who had first introduced me to Gianna, was waiting for us at the front desk. Her usual bright smile was tinged with something softer, more genuine today. "You two take care of yourselves," she said, her voice warm. "It's been a pleasure knowing you." "Thank you, Claire," I replied, giving her a small smile. "For everything." Robert shook her hand firmly. "You've been good to us, Claire. We appreciate it." She nodded, her eyes a bit misty. "You're welcome. And don't be strangers, all right? Come back and visit." "We'll see," Robert said with a wink, though we both knew the chances of that were slim. It wasn't that we didn't appreciate the people here, but the nursing home had been a chapter we were eager to close. Gianna arrived shortly after, her car packed with the essentials we'd need for our new home. She stepped out, looking radiant as ever, her smile wide and welcoming. "How are my two favorite men?" she asked, pulling us both into a hug. "We're ready," Robert replied, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "More than ready." "Then let's get you out of here," Gianna said, her tone light but filled with excitement. We loaded our bags into the trunk, and soon we were driving away from the nursing home, leaving behind the grey walls and regimented routine for what felt like the first time in ages. The car ride was quiet at first, the three of us lost in our thoughts. The world outside the window seemed brighter, more alive, as if reflecting the change in our circumstances. "So, Gianna," Robert said, breaking the silence as we drove through the city streets, "how's this place of yours? It's been a while since I've seen anything other than beige walls and linoleum floors." Gianna laughed, a sound that was both warm and reassuring. "It's nothing fancy, but it's homey. My parents were old-fashioned, so the place has a bit of that vintage charm. It's been empty for a while, but I've kept it in good shape." "I don't care if it's a shack," I said, looking out at the world that had felt so distant from us for so long. "As long as it's ours." Gianna reached over and squeezed my hand. "It's yours, Carlos. You'll see. I think you're going to love it." When we finally arrived, I couldn't help but feel a pang of nostalgia. The apartment building was in a quiet neighborhood, lined with old oak trees that cast dappled shadows across the sidewalk. It was a sturdy brick structure, built in a time when things were made to last. Gianna led us up the stairs to the second floor, and as she unlocked the door, I felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. "Welcome home," she said with a smile, pushing the door open. The apartment was cozy, with high ceilings and large windows that let in plenty of natural light. The living room was furnished with a comfortable-looking couch, a couple of armchairs, and a coffee table that showed signs of wear and tear, but had been lovingly polished. A bookcase filled with old novels and knick-knacks lined one wall, and a vintage radio sat on a small table by the window, a relic from a bygone era. "Wow," Robert said, stepping inside and taking it all in. "This is incredible." I couldn't agree more. The apartment had a warmth to it, a feeling of being lived in, even though it had been empty for so long. It wasn't just a place to stay, it was a home. Gianna showed us around, pointing out the two bedrooms, one for each of us, a small but functional kitchen, and a bathroom with a clawfoot tub that looked like it had been there since the building was first constructed. "I know it's not the Ritz," she said, almost apologetically, "but I wanted to make sure you both had your own space." "I hope it's okay." "Okay," I said, shaking my head in disbelief. "Gianna, this is more than okay, it's perfect." Robert nodded in agreement, his expression softer than usual. "You've done more for us than we could have ever expected. This place, it's more than we could have hoped for." Gianna smiled, clearly pleased. "I'm glad you think so. I just want you to be comfortable here, to feel like it's your home." She walked over to the kitchen, where a basket of fresh bread, fruit, and a bottle of wine sat on the counter. "I thought we could have a little celebration tonight," she said, turning to us with a grin, "to toast to new beginnings." "That sounds like a fine idea," Robert replied, a rare smile spreading across his face. As Gianna busied herself in the kitchen, Robert and I sat down in the living room, still taking in the reality of our new surroundings. It felt almost too good to be true, as if any moment we might wake up and find ourselves back in the nursing home. But the soft cushions beneath me, the smell of fresh bread, and the sound of Gianna humming quietly as she prepared dinner all grounded me in the present. This was real. This was happening. Robert leaned back in his chair, a contented sigh escaping his lips. "I never thought I'd see the day, Carlos. A place of our own again. It almost feels like a dream." I know what you mean, I replied, glancing around the room. But it's real, Robert. Thanks to Gianna, we've got another shot at living. He nodded thoughtfully. And I don't intend to waste it. We've got time left, and I plan to make the most of it. Dinner that night was simple but delicious: roast chicken, potatoes, and a salad made from fresh vegetables Gianna had picked up from the market. The three of us sat around the table, the soft glow of the overhead light casting a warm ambience over the room. As we ate, the conversation flowed easily, filled with laughter and stories of the past. "So, what's the plan now?" Gianna asked, pouring us each a glass of wine. "You two are free men. What do you want to do with your time?" Robert and I exchanged a glance, both of us smiling at the possibilities. I began that we'd like to stay busy. Maybe take on some work, nothing too strenuous, but something that keeps us moving. Robert nodded in agreement, something meaningful. We're not ready to sit around and do nothing just yet. Gianna's eyes sparkled with approval. I think that's a great idea, and I might have just the thing to get you started. Oh? Robert asked, intrigued. Gianna leaned forward, a playful smile on her lips. How would you feel about helping out with some deliveries? I know a few people in the neighborhood who could use a hand getting groceries and other things. It's nothing too hard, but it would give you both something to do. And it's a good way to meet people. I grinned, feeling a sense of excitement I hadn't felt in years. That sounds perfect. We're in. Good, Gianna said, raising her glass. To new beginnings and making the most of every day. To new beginnings, Robert and I echoed, clinking our glasses together. As we settled into our new home, the days began to take on a rhythm that was both comforting and invigorating. Robert and I quickly became known around the neighborhood as the two old-timers who were always willing to lend a hand. We delivered groceries, walked dogs, and even helped some of the older residents with odd jobs around their homes. It wasn't glamorous work, but it gave us a sense of purpose that we hadn't felt in a long time. In the evenings, Gianna would often join us for dinner, and we'd sit around the table, sharing stories and laughter. Her son Jose visited frequently, and before long, he became a fixture in our lives as well. He was a bright, curious boy with an infectious energy that brought a new kind of joy to our days. One evening, after a particularly busy day of deliveries, we all sat together in the living room, enjoying a well-deserved rest. Jose, who had been playing with a toy car on the floor, suddenly looked up at me with wide eyes. "Mr. Carlos," he said, his voice serious, "do you like it here?" I smiled at him, feeling a warmth in my chest. "I do, Jose. I like it very much." He nodded as if this answer was exactly what he expected. "Good, 'cause I like having you and Mr. Robert here." Robert chuckled, ruffling Jose's hair. "We like being here too, kiddo." Gianna watched us, her eyes soft with affection. "You two have become family to us, you know. I'm so glad you're here." "Family?" I repeated, the word filling me with a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in a long time. "Yeah, I think we are." And with that, I knew that this new chapter of our lives was exactly where we were meant to be. In this apartment, with these people, we had found more than just a place to live. We had found a home. The days at the new apartment settled into a comfortable routine, but it was far from the monotonous existence Robert and I had known in the nursing home. Instead of counting the hours, we found ourselves looking forward to each new day, eager to see what it would bring. It was a change neither of us had anticipated, but one that we both embraced wholeheartedly. The work Gianna had suggested, delivering groceries and running errands for the neighbors, quickly became a central part of our lives. It was simple work, but it was exactly what we needed. It gave us a sense of purpose, something to get up for each morning. We became familiar faces around the neighborhood, and before long, people began to greet us with friendly waves and warm smiles as we made our rounds. One morning, as we sat at the kitchen table enjoying a breakfast of toast and scrambled eggs, Robert looked at me with a thoughtful expression. "You know, Carlos, I've been thinking." I glanced up from my coffee, curious. "About what?" He took a sip of his own coffee, then set the mug down. "About how good it feels to be doing something again. To be useful. I didn't realize how much I missed it until now." I nodded in agreement, understanding exactly what he meant. It's amazing how much better the days feel when you've got something to do, something that matters. Robert leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant as if he were reflecting on the past. Back in the day, I used to be a teacher. I spent years trying to make a difference in kids' lives, helping them see the world in a new way. When I retired, I thought I was ready for it, but I didn't realize how much I'd miss having that purpose. I looked at him surprised. I didn't know you were a teacher, Robert. He smiled, a touch of nostalgia in his eyes. Yeah, a history teacher. I loved it, getting kids excited about the past, showing them how the events that happened centuries ago still impact their lives today. It gave me a reason to get up in the morning, a reason to keep going. I could see the passion in his eyes, the way he spoke about teaching with such fondness. It made me think about my own past, about the things I'd once been passionate about. I used to be a carpenter, I said, feeling the need to share a piece of myself in return. Built furniture mostly. I love the craftsmanship, the satisfaction of creating something with my hands. There was nothing quite like the feeling of finishing a piece and knowing it was something that would last. Robert nodded, understanding. That's the thing, isn't it? Having something to show for your efforts, something tangible. Exactly, I said, smiling at the shared sentiment. That's why this work we're doing now feels so good. We may not be building furniture or teaching kids, but we're making a difference, even if it's in a small way. Robert's eyes lit up with a new idea. What if we took it a step further? I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What do you mean? He leaned forward, his voice filled with excitement. What if we started offering more than just deliveries? We've both got skills, me with teaching, you with woodworking. Maybe there are people in the neighborhood who could use our help with those things too. The idea sparked something in me, a sense of excitement that I hadn't felt in years. You think people would be interested? Why not? Robert replied, a grin spreading across his face. There's always someone who needs a hand, whether it's fixing something around the house or tutoring a kid who's struggling in school. We could offer our services, do what we're good at. I thought about it, imagining the possibilities. It wasn't just about staying busy, it was about finding a real sense of purpose, about reconnecting with the parts of ourselves that we thought we'd lost. I like the sound of that, Robert. I really do. Then let's do it, he said, his enthusiasm infectious. Let's see if we can make something of this. That very afternoon, we decided to put our plan into action. With Gianna's help, we drafted up a simple flyer that advertised our services. Robert offered tutoring in history and other subjects, while I offered my skills as a handyman and carpenter. We kept the language straightforward and friendly, emphasizing that we were just a couple of retired guys looking to stay busy and help out where we could. Gianna was thrilled with the idea, and she helped us distribute the flyers around the neighborhood, slipping them under doors and pinning them up on community boards. I think this is a fantastic idea, she said as we walked back to the apartment after our rounds. You two have so much to offer, and I'm sure there are plenty of people who could use a hand. We're just hoping to stay busy, I said, though the truth was, I was eager to see if anyone would respond. It didn't take long. The very next day, we got our first call. A young mother named Marissa was looking for someone to help her son, Ethan, with his history homework. He was struggling with the subject, and she was hoping Robert could step in. When Robert got off the phone, his eyes were shining. We've got our first job, Carlos. I'm meeting with Ethan this afternoon. That's great, Robert, I said, genuinely happy for him. You're going to do a great job. That kid doesn't know how lucky he is to have you as a tutor. Robert grinned, clearly excited. And what about you? Any calls yet? I shook my head. Not yet, but I'm sure something will come up. As it turned out, I didn't have to wait long. A few hours later, I received a call from an elderly woman named Mrs. Ramirez. She needed help repairing an old wooden cabinet that had belonged to her late husband. It was a sentimental piece, and she didn't trust just anyone to fix it. When I assured her that I had years of experience in woodworking, she seemed relieved and asked if I could come by the next day. When I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of pride I hadn't experienced in a long time. Looks like we're both in business, Robert, I said, smiling. Robert nodded, his expression one of satisfaction. Here's to new beginnings, Carlos. We're doing it. The next day, I visited Mrs. Ramirez's home, a cozy little house just a few blocks away from our apartment. She was a kind woman, with a warmth that reminded me of my own mother. She led me into her living room, where the cabinet stood against the wall, its surface worn and scratched from years of use. "This was my husband's favorite piece," she said, her voice tinged with emotion. "He built it himself, and it's been in our family ever since. But lately it's been falling apart, and I just don't have the skills to fix it." I examined the cabinet, running my hand over the wormwood. It was a beautiful piece, solidly built but in need of some care. "I can see why it's so special," I said, giving her a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, Mrs. Ramirez. I'll take good care of it. I'll have it looking as good as new." She smiled, clearly relieved. "Thank you, Mr. Baker. It means so much to me." As I worked on the cabinet, carefully sanding down the rough spots and repairing the joints, I felt a sense of contentment that had been missing for too long. It was the kind of work that required patience and attention to detail, the kind of work that I had always loved. And knowing that I was helping someone preserve a cherished memory made it all the more meaningful. Meanwhile, Robert's tutoring sessions with Ethan were going well. Each afternoon, he'd come back to the apartment with stories of their lessons, his face lit up with the joy of teaching again. "Ethan's a smart kid," Robert said one evening as we sat in the living room, enjoying a cup of tea. "He just needed someone to show him how to look at history differently. I think he's starting to enjoy it now." "That's all thanks to you," I said, genuinely impressed. "You've still got the magic touch, Robert." He chuckled, clearly pleased. "It feels good, Carlos. It feels really good." As the days turned into weeks, our little side business began to grow. Word spread around the neighborhood, and soon we were getting more calls than we'd anticipated. Robert took on a few more students, while I found myself busy with various woodworking projects and repair jobs. We were busier than we'd been in years, but it was the kind of busy that felt fulfilling, not exhausting. One afternoon, as we sat in the kitchen taking a break from our work, Robert looked at me with a thoughtful expression. "You know, Carlos, I think we found something here. Something that gives our days meaning again." I nodded, feeling the truth of his words. "You're right. This is more than just a way to pass the time. It's a way to keep living. And we're not just doing it for ourselves," Robert added. "We're helping people, making a difference, even if it's in small ways." I smiled, feeling a sense of pride that went beyond the work we were doing. Who would have thought, huh? Two old guys like us, starting a new chapter like this. Robert chuckled, raising his mug of tea in a toast. "To new purposes, Carlos. And to making the most of every day." "To new purposes," I echoed, clinking my mug against his. As we continued our work in the weeks that followed, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the turn my life had taken. The nursing home felt like a distant memory, a place where I had once resigned myself to fading away. But now, in this new chapter, I had found something that I hadn't even realized I'd lost, a sense of purpose, a reason to keep going. And it wasn't just about the work. It was about the people we were helping, the connections we were making, and the feeling that we still had something valuable to offer the world. In the evenings, when Gianna and Josie would join us for dinner, the apartment was filled with laughter and conversation. It was a far cry from the lonely, quiet nights in the nursing home. We had become a family in every sense of the word, and it felt like we were all growing stronger together. As I lay in bed each night, I found myself thinking about the future with a sense of optimism that I hadn't felt in years. There was still so much life left to live, so many new experiences to embrace. And with Robert by my side, I knew we could face whatever challenges came our way. This new purpose we had found wasn't just about keeping busy, it was about finding meaning in each day, about proving to ourselves that we still had so much to give. And as long as we had that, I knew that we would continue to thrive. The morning light streamed through the apartment windows, casting a warm glow on the wooden floorboards. It had been months since Robert and I moved into this cozy space, and already it felt like home, more so than any place I'd lived in years. Our days had settled into a rhythm, filled with purpose and a sense of belonging that neither of us had expected to find at this stage of our lives. But today felt different. There was an energy in the air, a quiet anticipation that hummed beneath the surface. It was a Saturday and Gianna and Josie were coming over for dinner. It was something we did regularly now, a ritual that had become the cornerstone of our new lives. But tonight there was something special about it. Perhaps it was the unspoken understanding that the bonds we had formed were no longer just about friendship or companionship. They were about family. As I set the table, placing the worn but polished silverware beside the plates, Robert came into the kitchen, his face lighting up when he saw the preparations. "Setting the table already, Carlos? They're not due for another hour," he remarked with a chuckle. I shrugged, a small smile playing on my lips. "Just making sure everything's perfect. You know how much Gianna likes things to be just right." Robert nodded, understanding. True. But I think she'd be happy just spending time with us, regardless of whether the napkins are folded correctly." I laughed, appreciating his laid-back attitude. "Maybe so, but it doesn't hurt to make a little extra effort. Besides, it feels good to be doing this. It's been a long time since I've had people to cook for." "You're not the only one," Robert replied, his tone softening. All of this, it's more than I ever expected. I thought I was done with the whole idea of family, but now it's like we've been given a second chance." "Yeah," I agreed, glancing around the kitchen that had become the heart of our home. "A second chance. I never thought I'd get one." Robert smiled, a rare expression of pure contentment crossing his features. "We're lucky men, Carlos. Lucky to have found each other, and even luckier to have found Gianna and Jose." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang, signaling their arrival. My heart lifted at the sound, and I quickly finished setting the table as Robert went to answer the door. Moments later, I heard the familiar voices of Gianna and Jose filling the hallway, their laughter and chatter bringing a sense of warmth to the apartment that made it feel complete. "Carlos." Jose's voice rang out as he bounded into the kitchen, his eyes bright with excitement. "Look what I made in school today." He held up a small clay sculpture, clearly proud of his work. It was a lumpy, slightly misshapen figure, but the effort and care he put into it were evident. I crouched down to his level, examining the sculpture with a smile. "That's fantastic, Jose. What is it?" "It's a dog," Jose said, his grin widening, "like the ones we walk sometimes." I laughed, ruffling his hair. "You did a great job, buddy. It looks just like a dog." Gianna appeared in the doorway, her eyes twinkling with amusement as she watched our interaction. "He's been working on that all week," she said, stepping into the kitchen. "He couldn't wait to show you." "It's wonderful," I said, standing up to greet her. "We'll have to find a special place for it." "Maybe on the windowsill," Gianna suggested, leaning in to give me a quick kiss on the cheek. "It'll look nice there, don't you think?" "Perfect," I agreed, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the cozy kitchen. Robert joined us then, carrying a bottle of wine that he'd retrieved from the cabinet. "Shall we get started on dinner, or do we need a moment to admire more artwork?" he teased, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "Dinner sounds good to me," Gianna replied with a laugh. "I'm starving." "Me too," Jose chimed in, bouncing on his heels. With that, we all got to work. Gianna took charge of the salad, expertly tossing the fresh greens with a light vinaigrette. Robert handled the wine, pouring generous glasses for the adults, while Jose busied himself setting out the bread. I took the roast out of the oven, the aroma filling the kitchen with a mouth-watering scent that made my stomach growl in anticipation. As we moved around the kitchen, working together in a seamless dance of familiarity, I couldn't help but marvel at how natural it all felt. This was what family was supposed to be. People coming together, sharing meals, and making memories that would last a lifetime. Once everything was ready, we sat down at the table, the flickering candlelight casting a warm glow over our faces. For a moment, we were all silent, simply taking in the moment, appreciating the simple joy of being together. Finally, Gianna raised her glass, a soft smile playing on her lips. "I'd like to make a toast," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "To family, old and new. To second chances and new beginnings. And to the people who make life worth living." "To family," we all echoed, clinking our glasses together. As we dug into the meal, the conversation flowed easily, filled with laughter and stories from the week. Jose regaled us with tales from school, his excitement infectious as he talked about his latest projects and adventures with his friends. Gianna shared some amusing anecdotes from work, while Robert and I recounted our recent experiences with the neighborhood delivery service. At one point, Gianna turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "You know, Carlos, you and Robert have done so much for this neighborhood. People are always telling me how grateful they are for your help. You've really made a difference." I felt a flush of pride at her words, but I shook my head modestly. We're just trying to stay busy, Gianna. But it does feel good to know that we're helping people. Robert nodded in agreement. It's given us a new purpose, that's for sure. But I think the real difference has been in us. We're the ones who've benefited the most from this. Gianna reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. You're too humble, Carlos, but that's one of the things I love about you. I looked at her, the warmth in her eyes making my heart swell. I'm just grateful, I said softly, my voice filled with sincerity. Grateful for this second chance, for you and Jose, and for the life we've built together. Gianna smiled, squeezing my hand gently. We're grateful for you too, Carlos. You and Robert have brought so much joy into our lives. We're all in this together now, one big, unconventional family. Robert chuckled, raising his glass again. Here's to being unconventional. I wouldn't have it any other way. As the night went on, the conversation grew more intimate, the bonds between us solidifying with each shared laugh, each shared story. There was a sense of belonging that filled the apartment, a feeling that we had all found our place in the world again. After dinner, we moved to the living room, where Josie insisted on showing us his latest drawings. We sat on the couch, watching as he proudly displayed each one, his enthusiasm lighting up the room. Gianna leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder, while Robert watched with a fun smile on his face. You know, Robert said after a while, his voice reflective, I never thought I'd have this again. A family, I mean. After everything that happened, I figured that part of my life was over. Gianna looked at him, her eyes filled with understanding. We've all been through a lot, Robert. But that's the thing about family, it doesn't have to be about blood. It's about the people who stand by you, who make you feel like you belong. Robert nodded, his expression softening. You're right. And I'm glad to be a part of this family. It's more than I ever expected. We're glad to have you, I said, meaning every word. You're a big part of what makes this place feel like home. The rest of the evening passed in a warm, comfortable haze. We talked about the future, about the things we wanted to do together, weekend trips to the park, holidays spent in each other's company, and all the little moments that made life so precious. There was a sense of hope in the air, a feeling that the best days were still ahead of us. As the night drew to a close and Gianna and Jose prepared to head home, I felt a pang of sadness at the thought of them leaving. But it was tempered by the knowledge that we would see them again soon, that they were never really far away. Thank you for dinner, Carlos, Gianna said as she hugged me at the door. It was wonderful as always. Thank you for being here, I replied, holding her close for a moment. It means the world to me. She smiled, pulling back to look at me. We're in this together, remember? Always. Always, I echoed, feeling the truth of that word deep in my heart. After they left, Robert and I sat in the quiet living room, the glow of the evening still lingering in the air. I looked at him, a sense of peace settling over me. We did it, Robert, I said softly. We found our way back to something good. He nodded, his expression content. Yeah, Carlos, we did. And it feels right, doesn't it? It does, I agreed, leaning back in my chair. It really does. As I sat there, surrounded by the remnants of the evening, a half-empty bottle of wine, plates with crumbs still on them, and the sound of Jose's laughter still echoing in my ears, I realized just how far we had come. We had started as two old men who had lost everything, and now we had found something so much more than we ever could have imagined. We had found a family once more, and with it, a new lease on life. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly content, knowing that whatever the future held, we would face it together.